Okay, so locators. So as I told, like we have discussed about n number of locators. So what are the different types of locators we have discussed in the sense, like we have discussed about the ID, name, class name, and in XPath like we have seen multiple syntaxes. And in yesterday's session, like we have discussed about the linked text and the partial linked text. And then while handling the table, like we have discussed about the locator property called as a tag name. And apart from this locator, so we are having one more locator called as an CSS selector. So when compared to other locator, so we always call the CSS selector as an lightweight. So why we are telling this as a lightweight in the sense, when compared to other locator, it will find the element much faster in the backend HTML code. So like if we use the CSS syntax, it will find the element very fast when compared to the other locator. Let's say when compared to the XPath, it always find the element much faster. And how we write the syntax of XPath? So we use to write like double slash of tag name. So followed by we will be using the @ symbol, and we will be providing the attribute, and we will be assigning some value. So this is the traditional syntax of the XPath. And how the syntax of CSS selector look like in the sense, so we won't use this double slash. So instead of which, like we can directly provide the tag name, and then we don't need to provide this @ symbol. So we can specify the attribute, and then we can assign the value. Okay, so the syntax is much simpler. So now let us try to use this CSS selector, and let me explain like what are the different types of other notations which are available in the CSS selector. And also like again it is purely user choice. So if you are comfortable with the XPath, so please go ahead with and use with the XPath. And this is an another one alternative approach, so which is available in the Selenium. So depend upon your need, so you can use this syntax. Okay, so now let me just pick the Salesforce application. So in the Salesforce application, let me try to automate the scenario. So I'm planning to enter the username and password, and this time I'm going to enter the username and password, or I'm going to click this login button purely with the help of the CSS selector. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a one more scenario. Okay, so like handle with CSS selector. And the prerequisite in the sense, like we don't need to give the browser invocation as the prerequisite, because I told, so like whenever you are executing any of the scenario, the hooks call will execute and it will automatically initialize the respective WebDriver. So the prerequisite is nothing but like before validation, whatever the user action which we used to do, so those things we call it as a prerequisite. So here we are going to like enter the username and password. So I'm just creating the statement. So user enters the username and password, and in real time, so we won't mention the sensitive data in the feature file. So sensitive data in the sense the credentials. So here we have mentioned the sensitive data called as an ABC and the password as 123. So we won't mention the sensitive data. So the sensitive data should be read like either from the config file. So either we should configure the sensitive data in the config file, or else like we should maintain the sensitive data in the Excel sheet. So at the later part, like we will see how we can read the data from the Excel sheet. So whenever you are creating any of the statement, hover over the mouse and create the step definition. I am creating the respective step definition file, and inside which traditionally, so how we write the coding. So we are going to write the coding with the help of the WebDriver, and the variable name of the WebDriver we call it as a driver. So I can use like driver dot find element by dot, and this time I'm going to use the locator called as an CSS selector. Okay, so whenever we are using the CSS selector, so we should follow the regular expression of the CSS selector. So you know this is the syntax. And what is the tag name which is available? If I need to enter the value in the username, I can right click and I can inspect it up, and I can look on the tag name. So the tag name will start with the input. So I'm just providing the tag name in the syntax, and followed by I'm just creating open and close square bracket, and what is the attribute we are going to use. So we can pick any of the attribute. Let's say I'm planning to use the ID, and the attribute value is username. I can say like ID is equal to, in a single quotes I can provide the username. So how in the H path the user used to check whether the syntax is correct or not. In similar way, like you can copy the syntax and you can go back to the HTML code, click anywhere and do the Control F. If you just click on the Control F, automatically the search symbol, the search box will be open, and here you could able to see it state that so we can find by string selector or XPath. Either we can use the string value or we can use the selector. So selector in the sense it indicates you can check with the CSS syntax or with the XPath. So now we have created the CSS syntax. I am pasting the CSS syntax, and if the syntax is correct, so it will obviously highlight the respective node, and we can use the syntax in our coding. Okay, so I'm just as it is accepting the string as a argument, I'm mentioning the syntax in the double quotes, and let me enter some value with the help of the send keys. So with the send keys I'm entering the username, so let it be of an sample. Similar way, if I need to enter the password, I'm going to use the CSS selector. I'm right clicking and inspecting, and we can use any of the locator property. So let me try to use the attribute called as a type. I'm just replacing the ID with the type, and we can use the corresponding attribute value. So whenever the syntax is correct, so it is going to highlight the respective node. I'm just copying it up and pasting in my syntax. So like driver dot find element by dot CSS selector, and I'm updating the CSS selector, and in the send with the help of the send keys I'm just injecting the data. And how we are injecting the data in the sense we are hard coding the data. So what is meant by hard code in the sense, like we are manually injecting the data, so which means the user can't change the test data. So whenever we are executing this particular script, so it will use only this test data called as a sample and 123. So which is nothing but we are using the static test data. So whenever we use the static test data, so we call it as a hard code value, but in the real time, so we always need to test with the dynamic test data. So during each and every run, so we should use the different test data, so that like we can test the same scenario with the multiple test data, and we can ensure that whether the functionality is working as expected or not. Okay, so now we have amended the coding, and let's try to run the script. So in order to run the script, as I mentioned, so before each and every scenario, so we should provide some unique tag. So let me provide the tag as CSS selector. So whenever we provide the tag, we should update the tag in the runner file, and also like I mentioned, like we should update the URL in the framework configuration dot properties. Okay, so here I'm going to update the URL. So the URL technically we call it as an environment, so we need to update the respective test environment. So now let me try to run the runner file. So now if I try to run the runner file, so it should invoke the browser, and it will enter the username and password. And how we are entering the username and password in the sense, like with the help of the CSS selector. So let the execution begin. So still the browser is not invoked. Yeah, so it is starting the execution, and let's see how the execution occurs. So the execution has started. Now it will initiate the hooks call, which is nothing but it will execute the annotation called as an at before annotation, and it will invoke the browser, and it is entering the username and then password. and at the end it is closing the browser automatically. So the reason is like again the hooks call will happen and it will close the browser automatically. So as of now, for time being, so let me comment this line so that like we can easily verify so what is the input which is injected in the web page. So now we are able to handle the same thing with a different locator called as an CSS selector. But so the CSS selector has few disadvantage. Like when we use the edge path, with the help of the edge path, like we can able to traverse from the child node to the parent node, or from the parent node to the child node. So like we can traverse in any of the direction. So you can iterate from the parent to child, or child to the parent, or to the sibling or ancestor or descendant. But when we use the CSS selector, so we can't able to traverse from parent to child. So we can sorry, so when we use the CSS selector, so we can able to traverse only from parent to child and not to child to parent. So this is the one disadvantage so which is available in the CSS selector. Even though it is lightweight, so like only the XPath have many features, and in the real time we prefer to use the CSS selector. So sorry, we prefer to use the XPath. But the CSS selector have few more annotations. So like, or we should not say annotation, I can say it is having few more notations. So generally the hash indicates id and the dot indicates the class. Okay, so in case if you are planning to use the id, so in our case we have used the id, and just I told in CSS selector, so hash indicates id. So what I can do, I can use the notation called as an hash, and I can specify the attribute value. Okay, so rather than writing the traditional CSS selector syntax, we can write the simple syntax with the help of the notation. So we can use the hash. So hash indicates ID, and we need to specify the respective attribute value. So now if I try to copy paste the syntax, and if I try to search here, okay, so still we can able to see it is highlighting this particular node, because so the hash indicates the id, and we can use the syntax in our coding. Okay, so either we can use the traditional syntax, or else like you can use the optimized syntax. Now let me try to re-repeat the same line, like driver dot
So without
find
using
element.
the tag name, directly hash and attribute.
Yes, correct.
No tag name
No
required.
tag name is required.
Okay.
Okay, so we can use like driver dot find element by dot CSS selector, and I can paste the syntax, and then like I can inject the send keys value called as an sample. Now I can comment it up. Okay, I can comment the above line. So which means either we can use the traditional CSS selector syntax, or we can convert the CSS selector syntax with the help of the notation. In similar way, like whenever you are planning to use the uh, class name, so instead of using the driver dot find element by dot class name, or instead of traditionally converting with the help of the ets path, so you can easily use the class name locator with the help of the syntax called as a dot. So whenever we say dot, so for example, let me pick we are having something called as a classes equal to input group. So if I say dot input group, so it will highlight this particular node, because like dot represents the class name. And even we can handle the compound class very easily with the help of the CSS selector. So generally like, so the Selenium won't support the compound class, and in order to handle the compound class, so either we should convert into an XPath syntax, or else like we can use the CSS selector syntax. And how we can use the CSS selector syntax in the sense, like as I told, so the dot represents the class name. So now let me just identify any of the compound class. So even here it says label space username label. It is kind of an compound class. And how the compound class can be easily handled in the sense, like before this starting of this attribute value, you can mention dot, and wherever space is there, you can replace the spaces with the dot. So now it will convert as a single class name, and you can use this syntax in your coding. So like I can use driver dot find element by dot CSS selector, and I can use the syntax called as an dot label dot username. So which is nothing but we are handling the compound class. So we can use the special notations like hash indicates the ID and dot indicates the class name, or else like you can use the traditional CSS selector. So whenever we use this CSS selector, it will find the element much faster when compared to the XPath. So like the CSS selector will act as like kind of an Google search. It will find the element within the fraction of second, and even like the XPath is going to find the element, but it will take some time. So like it is kind of an Yahoo search. But in the real time world, so in majority of the project, like we prefer to use the XPath, considering the advantage of the XPath over the CSS selector, because like with the help of the XPath, like we can use the XPath access, like we can traverse to the parent to child or child to the parent or the ancestor and descendant and the following or the preceding sibling. So considering the advantage, so we prefer to use the XPath. But in some cases, if if you are unable to handle with the XPath syntax, then during that time you try to use the CSS selector. So the Selenium is providing various locator. So the reason is like if any one of the locator doesn't work, so you should try out with the other locator. Okay, you are trying to handle with the XPath, but when we try to use the XPath, if it is unable to perform the click operation, or if it is unable to enter the send keys value, then you should try out with the other locator. Okay, so that is the reason the Selenium is providing n number of locators. So in today's market, so each and every web pages are developed with the different programming language, and we for sure, so the any one of the locator property will fit to the particular web page. So that is the reason like we are having n number of locator property. Okay, so moving forward, like we can use one more syntax called as an CSS selector. And apart from this, like even we can modify the syntax of the XPath. So generally, traditionally, how we write the syntax in the sense, so double slash of tag name at the attribute is equal to value. So here we are specifying the tag name. So whenever we are going to find this attribute and attribute value, it will search the corresponding attribute and attribute value only in that particular tag. So if I say double slash of div at id is equal to 123, so it is going to search the id only inside the div tag. So which means in the backend HTML code, so like in the div tag, in the div node, it will check whether id is equal to 123 is present, and it won't search in the label tag, and it won't search in the input tag. But if you want to search this id is equal to 123 in all tag, then rather than providing the tag name, so you can provide the asterisk symbol. So whenever you provide the asterisk symbol, it indicates like you are searching the element in all tags, okay, not in a specific tag. In similar way, like in case of the CSS selector, right? So even if we don't provide the tag name, okay, so if I don't provide the tag name called as an input, it will search this id is equal to username in all node. Okay, so now let me just try to copy paste, and let me try to write the syntax and even see, like we haven't specified the tag name, but still it is able to find this id is equal to username, because it will scan in each and every node So it won't check whether it is starting with the input tag or div tag or the label tag. So it will search in all node, because like we are not specifying the tag name. So in your case, if you wish, you don't want to specify the tag, you want to find the element in various node. So then during the time, so we can skip this tag name. And in the real time scenario, in few web pages, what happened, so the developer will frequently change this tag name. So only the tag name will get changed, but other properties, whatever the locator properties which is available inside this node, will remains as it is. So during the time, we don't need to consider the tag, and how we can ignore the tag name in the sense like we can use the @ symbol. So whatever the tag is present, it won't consider the tag name. So it will check the corresponding attribute and attribute value in all node and not in the specific node based upon the tags. Okay, so till this point, does anyone have any doubt?
Using this notation hash and dot,
Hmm.
we can travel from parent to child.
No, we can't travel. If you need to traverse from parent to child, so we need to use one more special syntax, like how we use the keyword called as a parent in the H path. If you need to traverse, you should use the symbol called as an greater than. Okay, so when you say the greater than symbol, so which indicates we are going to traverse from one node to the other node. So let's say, like here, let me just write the CSS selector syntax for this particular node. And if I need to traverse to the child node, I can use the greater than symbol and I can provide the tag name. So it will traverse to the corresponding child node. Okay, so we can use the special notation, so like which is nothing but, so we can able to traverse only from parent to child, but we can't traverse from child to parent, or
Sir,
you can't traverse
voice
from
is
the
breaking.
sibling. So no,
Your voice is breaking, Ji.
just a minute, I will change my Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
Okay, so now hope it will be better. So what I told is like, let me
yeah.
just re-repeat. So as I specified, like with the help of the CSS selector, we can traverse from parent to child. And how we can traverse from parent to child in the sense, even with the special notation called as an greater than symbol. So like initially I have written the syntax for the parent node. So this is going to act as the parent node and it is having the multiple child node. So if I traverse from parent to child, so then we can easily so use the notation called as an greater than, and you can specify the tag name. So by this way, like you can make the syntax much simpler. Okay, so these are the possible notations which are available in the CSS selector, and with the help of this notation you can customize your own syntax.
So these notations we can use, depending on our wish.
Yes, depend upon your need. If you're comfortable with the XPath, go ahead and use the XPath. If not, like if you're okay to use the CSS selector, you can use it up. But nowadays, like whenever you are attending the interview, so they are specifically asking the to write the syntax in the CSS selector.
Sir,
Okay, and for example, if we write, for example, hash instead of ID, we are using hash,
Hmm.
and then if we find the multiple
Multiple result, then
entries,
you
yeah.
should go ahead with the other locator property. So you should try out with the
Okay,
other attribute. So during that time, you should stick with the traditional syntax, because like inside the
okay,
traditional syntax we can fit the other attribute, right? So you can
yeah,
check
okay,
whether the other attribute is available and you can just customize the syntax accordingly.
okay.